I think any ambitious man aspires to be what's recently been termed as high value. But what is high value? A suitable definition I found for it is if there is a high demand for something. In that case, it would seem that some of the highest value men in recent history have been Nazi scientists. Now, you can't cancel me, so relax. And let me explain. This is Operation Paperclip. Okay, so to tell this story, we gotta go back to 1941. Hitler and the Germans invade the USSR, which then causes Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, to align with Britain. You have Britain, who was part of the Allies. Now he's aligned with Stalin, and then later the US aligns with Britain. So the Soviets went from being enemies to having an alliance pretty abruptly, out of necessity and strategy. So we're in a situation where our friend's friend is our friend type of thing. All right, fast forward to 1945. Obviously, the Allies win, but throughout World War II, it was widely documented that Nazi/German soldiers had the best technology, far superior to any other country. So immediately after the end of World War II, the Cold War kicks off. And you have the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which later turns into the CIA, and the Soviet Union, probably the KGB, snatching up every scientist and engineer they can get their hands on for their knowledge of rockets, aerospace, chemicals, medicine, and just overall military technology. So the Soviets got about 2,200, roughly. I wasn't there. And the US brought along 1,600. So mind you, what we're talking about here is after World War II, there was the Nuremberg trials, right? Where a lot of Nazis were prosecuted for war crimes, right? And some of the high value scientists, based on what they've done, were supposed to be tried at the Nuremberg trial. And if you are found guilty, a lot of times you were executed. So this is what we're dealing with. So there wouldn't have to be too much coercion, right? If you're gonna go to death row and a government comes along and says, well, if you work for us, we'll not send you to death row. In fact, you can have your own department. You can have these perks and that perks. We're gonna pay your expenses, relocate you, give you a different identity. It's not really a hard sell. So here's some of the prominent figures that were recruited and brought along by the US government. Under the Nazis, he was the director of the Mattel Work Factory, where V-2 rockets were built using forced concentration camp labor. And obviously in concentration camps, there's a lot of atrocities. Tens of thousands of prisoners, including political prisoners, at the concentration camp that he got his labor from, died due to being overworked, starvation, and obviously being executed. Now, after World War II, once the US brings him over, he became a leading engineer in NASA, hence the jacket. And he helped develop the Saturn V rocket that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon. Okay, now we have Hubertus Struggled, who is the head of aerospace medicine for Nazis. And what did he do? So he's more in the medical field. He's doing medical experiments. So he's exposing prisoners to extremely low and high temperatures, low and high pressure chambers, high flight altitude to see what will happen. Can't send one of their soldiers in the high altitude without knowing what's gonna happen. So he was doing basically torture experiments to see what would happen while he's with the Nazis. But what happens after the war? Again, he's brought over in Operation Paperclip, and he becomes known as the father of space medicine, whatever that means. He's also honored by the Air Force and, again, the theme's emerging, NASA, until his Nazi past resurfaces. Now we got Walter. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce his last name. I'm not German, but read it and weep. He was a major general in the German Army Medical Services. Again, he was guilty of doing medical experiments. The ones he planned were more so vaccination related, including typhus. He was the pre-Dr. Fauci. And after the war, he worked for the U.S. Army in Texas until his past was exposed. And then, did he serve time? What happened to him? He fled to Argentina. Which, fun fact, there's a giant population of Nazis descendants in Argentina, but that's going to be another video. Moving right along. Now we have Kurt Blum, Deputy Surgeon General under the Third Reich. And what he did was work on biological warfare and chemical weapons. So obviously, again, a theme's emerging. They experimented on people in the concentration camps with all different type of diseases and plagues. But plot twist, he was acquitted during the Nuremberg trial. Now, it's widely been reported that that's obviously because the US government found him too valuable to be put to death, because plagues and diseases and chemical warfare can be used against our enemies. So we'll put him in charge of that over here. So once he was acquitted, he maintained a relationship with our intelligence service, who will consult him on matters like this. And lastly, we have the most famous, Wernher von Braun. Now this wasn't just one of these regular scientists, right? This was the top echelon. He was the lead German engineer that created the V2 rocket. And it's not one of those situations where other people can plead, oh, well, I was just following orders. The Nazi, if I didn't do what they told me to do, I was gonna die too, da da da. He joined the Nazi Party in 1937. He was a die-hard Nazi and an SS officer since 1940. And I keep saying the V2 rocket. V2 rocket is basically one of the early long-range missiles, right? Obviously, making those missiles used slave labor. From where? Again, concentration camps. And due to the inhumane treatment, over 20,000 people died under his watch while doing things like helping to make these V2 rockets. And he would do like sadistic things like have competitions between his forced labor force, and the top 5 slowest will all be hanged at the end of the day. But he was extremely valuable to us. So again, after the war, he comes over to the US and becomes the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket for who? NASA, and played a key role in us landing the first man on the moon in the Apollo mission, if that ever happened. And dies peacefully in 1971 in Virginia, having lived a full, very productive life. Okay, so that was a little disturbing, but let's talk about why this happened. So as I said, as soon as World War II ended, the Cold War started, which was basically, you have 2 superpowers left. You have the US, obviously, and the Soviet Union. Soviet Union is communist. The US is capitalist society. It was basically a game of who can force their influence on as much of the world as possible. The Soviets would basically converting other countries to communism in their viewpoint and ideology, and the US was doing the same. Now during this time they were fighting proxy wars. For example, Afghanistan. Russia invades and tries to take over Afghanistan, but the US, not like in Russia, gives money, weapons, and support indirectly to Afghanistan to keep the Russians out. So the reason it's called a Cold War is because the US and Soviet Union weren't ever fighting directly, right? There was a lot of espionage going on, spying, stealing secrets. Remember, the US at this time had dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan during the war, the only ones with nuclear capability. And then the Soviet Union soon after got it, due to what? Spying, recruiting scientists, things of that nature, right? So there's a lot of spying going on, there's a lot of indirect fighting going on, there's a lot of sabotage going on. Now, mind you, it's a Cold War, but it can heat up at any moment. As soon as the wrong ship is sunk, as soon as the wrong plane is shot down, it's gonna heat up real fast. There's also a lot of propaganda being spread about each other, and a lot of coups in other countries to get our way or for them to get their way, right? So there's a lot going on under the surface. The Cold War is really a matter of life and death, not for just the two countries involved in it, but for really the whole world, because obviously with nuclear capabilities, that's extremely dangerous to the world. And the fact that we're fighting really on either of our soil, all of our indirect fighting is going on in other countries, right? So I'm assuming it was a scary time for everybody. Now, number two, like I said, we were both snatching up scientists left and right, right? So if we took the moral high ground, we as in US, and either killed all the Nazis that did war crimes and let the Soviets take whoever they took, they would have took every single person they possibly could have, I'm pretty sure, would have quickly surpassed us with the knowledge that they gained from these Nazi scientists. Remember, the German fighting machine was far advanced, so far advanced of every other country that we basically had to jump. Right? Because Japan dropped out once those nukes were done. Italy wasn't doing much under Mussolini. Germany was really on his Drake time. It wasn't quite a 20v1, but we were definitely jumping. I'm gonna have to be mature and realize that life isn't fair. Guilty people get acquitted, never get caught, and they're just walking around living their best life every day. So what can we do about it? We can complain, which all the people that's involved are dead anyway, so it doesn't matter. Or we can learn from it. What can we possibly learn from this? Number one, the government be doing a lot of crazy shit behind your back. But more important than that, that technically you can become so valuable depending on your skill level and the situation that you can literally escape death row. It's possible to become above the law due to your perceived value if the stars line up correctly for you. Because there's a chance that this could have never happened if Hitler didn't invade Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union might not have switched sides, and if they didn't switch sides, then this whole scenario may not have happened. So obviously the stars lined up correctly for them, and those 1,600 plus those 2,200 got away with any and all war crimes they did. But again, everybody I mentioned besides Hitler were either acquitted or not tried at all. And there's some people that suggest Henry Kissinger was a war criminal. So it's all perspective. But I guess the lesson we can take from this is you should try to morally entrench yourself in whatever field or pursuit that you have until your value is unquestioned. And then you'll have a little bit of wiggle room to what Machiavelli would call being bad, which I'm not advocating for anything unmoral. Remember, I said morally. Plus, I just thought it was a cool story and wanted to tell you about it. So, like, comment, subscribe. That was the video for today. Hope you found it interesting, and I'm out.